Welcome to In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay, where we get candid about what it takes to negotiate effectively. You'll learn from the challenges and successes of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. We help you change the nature of your negotiations and get more from every deal you do.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of In the Ven Zone, where we help you, the small and mid-sized business owners, elevate your negotiation skills. And one of the ways we do that is we bring really interesting and intriguing guests who have different perspectives on negotiation, and we learn from their experiences. And today I am really excited because this is like a topic that really nobody thinks about in terms of negotiation. Student loans. I mean, who thinks that you can negotiate student loans, or that you can do something creative with student loans, or that you can negotiate your financial aid packages? And we're just getting ready to come back into, by the time this episode drops, we'll be coming back into school, and people will be starting to think about how they're going to finance their higher levels of education. Some of you know that I sit on the board of directors of Motivating Our Students Through Experience, and we work with women scholars, young women scholars who have a dream to go to college. And one of the big obstacles that prevents them from doing that is financial aid and student loans. And so today I am super excited to have Daphné Vanessa with us, and her partner in crime and life and marriage, Shamiel Rodriguez. They are the founders of an organization called StartNoo, and they have a creative way of helping people pay their student loans and finance their college education. And we're going to talk about the negotiation of that process, how they came about, how they came up with this idea, which is very novel, never seen anything like it, and where they're trying to take the whole issue around student loans and student debt in the United States. So Shamiel and Vanessa, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Absolutely. It's so excited to be here. We're really happy to be here.
We're happy to be on board.
So tell us a little about each of you, and then tell us kind of how you met, because I know I love those kind of stories. So Daphne, why don't you start? I just had my 28th wedding anniversary. So I love marriage stories and stuff. So Daphne, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, well, we just celebrated 9, so not quite there.
I remember my 9th anniversary. I remember exactly what we did for our anniversary on our 9th.
Wow. Nice. Super cute.
Yeah, it's one of our favorite ones, actually.
Oh, wow. Lucky 9. So we are StartNoo. We started off on finding a solution for the student loan debt crisis. And what this meant was that the crisis was huge at the time for our generation. We're millennials. So we were coming off of 2 back-to-back financial crises. And what that means is that in the first financial crisis in 2008, many may remember 2007 leading into 2008, Lehman Brothers died, there was an entire collapse. And what that meant was that people lost their jobs, and people who were just coming out of college to graduate, now there were no jobs left. I personally literally had my job at an investment bank, a major investment bank, rescinded. So I summered there, did very well, enjoyed my time there. And by the time it was time to graduate, I no longer had a job. So I was not the only one. A lot of us in this time frame were sort of in a period very similar to today's COVID pandemic, right? A little bit confused, not a lot of clarity. The world was at this breaking point, and we thought, well, what's next? Student loans really seem to be the heavy weight on a lot of people's shoulders, in that, well, if it weren't for these student loans, maybe I could just work at McDonald's for whatever per hour. But because I have, 6-figure, 5-figure student loan debt, I can't do that. And so we really needed to come up with a solution for that problem, right? Mm-hmm. And seeing our friends go through it. The second financial crisis a few years later was that Black Monday in 2011, right? And so let's say you went to graduate school to defer your student loan payments. then you were in a situation where you were graduating now in another sort of financial crisis, bad timing. And so it was important to figure out, well, what is out there? How are we going to be able to navigate? How are we going to lead the next generation forward as a workforce? Because if we don't work, then what is the next generation after that? So our generation I know a lot of people hate on millennials.
I don't. I love
We've gone
the
through
millennial
it.
generation. I absolutely love my millennials.
Thank you. Thank you. And we love Gen Z too. Gen Z and millennials, we have to hold tight.
Well, I'm Gen X, and Gen X has an issue with millennials, and I always think because they're jealous. Because they're jealous, because it's like you guys were given the opportunity to set boundaries that we were not given. And so so the expectation amongst Gen Xers, a lot of them, is that nobody should get to have boundaries if they didn't define them themselves. And I think that's BS. So I'm all about, I love working. Most of my friends are millennials, actually.
Yay!
I hang out with a lot of millennials.
I love that. I love that. We have multi-generational friendships as well, both up and down.
It's important. It's important.
It is. So that's a little bit about just the StartNoo story and how we came to be as an organization.
Well, tell us how you, Daphne, decided. What path did you take to get to here?
Sure. So I am a Haitian American, a proud Haitian American, born and raised partially in Mississippi. So I have a really unique experience in that, being a person of color in America, in the South, people expect a certain experience, but that wasn't the experience that I had. I actually had a fantastic experience growing up in Mississippi. People are often shocked to hear that, but I didn't really experience any sort of different treatment until I lived in the Northeast. So I had a fantastic time growing up in the South, and then had the privilege to live in many different countries, right? And so that included Haiti, of course, my native country, but it also included other countries in the Caribbean, Latin America as well. And that taught me that not everybody lives in a country where the government trusts you enough to loan you money to go to school. That is a privilege. And people often forget that while it sucks to have a large amount of student loan debt, it's also a privilege that the government trusted you enough to invest in your education. I lived in countries where that was not the case. It gave me a really unique experience. And I think just doing service in all of those countries as well, I met so many different people that I connected with. I had a fantastic opportunity. It was an opportunity and a privilege to be in that many countries. When I came back to America, I, like many others, watched movies, read books, and thought New York City is the place to be. And ended up going to college there and really enjoyed my college experience, but realized that if I was going to leverage any sort of participation that my parents were going to have in my college education, I needed to be strategic because I planned to have multiple degrees. So for college, I really got creative with how I was going to pay for school and ended up transferring from the initial school that I was admitted to so that I could go to another school that essentially paid me to go to school eventually. And so I got scholarships the traditional way. I also leveraged the donor relations office, which is an office that not a lot of people know about. And I also negotiated my financial aid package year upon year.
Yes. And we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So hold that thought. Shamiel, what about you? Tell us a little bit about your path. How did you get to this point?
Yeah. So what I was actually from the Northeast already, so from New Jersey, but my story is a little different than Daphne's. I didn't know much about the college experience or like what to do in terms of financing school. All I knew is that my parents were like, "You're going to college. Like that's it. It's going to help you income-wise." Like it was a very financial decision. Like that was the way I was trained to come out, and was like, "You go to college, life changes for you." So I was like, all right, that's all I have to do. Well, we didn't really cover how you pay for it and like, what does it look like long-term if you don't have those options? So if you don't have that stuff figured out just yet. So when I went to school, it was one of those times where like banks had like their tents lined up on a row and like you would just walk down the aisle and they were just like, "Oh, you need to pay for this? Here, sign this loan, no problem. Oh, you have no job or no credit history yet because you just came out of high school? No problem, we got you." Exactly. Yeah. So unfortunately, that was my experience. Unlike Daphne, I just didn't know that I could negotiate my financial aid package. I didn't know any of that stuff. I just was like happy to be there, right? I just to work hard, do what I could, and like, make sure that I locked in my career after that. That was like my objective. because my parents worked terribly hard to put me in that position. So I was not going to let that go to waste, because like Daphne had said, my parents came from an area, from a different perspective, where they were in places and positions where the government wasn't going to give you the ability to just go to school for free or pay for a loan and then have them back it for you. So we really have that, like I had that mindset that was what I needed to do. However, going through that experience and seeing what student loan debt can really do to you if you don't have a plan for it, or like how to finance your education, I was like, this can't happen to anyone else unless I like share that information with them. Like, it's great to go to school, but you need to know how you're going to finance it. And so that was like my motivation for getting involved with StartNoo, and something that really stuck with me as we started to develop this idea and this plan was, how do I reverse the scholarship, right? Like, not everyone gets a full ride when they go to college. And so,
don't, right?
Right. And so we were like, what if you're an amazing person after you go to school? What if you, did your thing and now you're like killing the game and you're doing what you need to do? Why not, have the ability to help pay off your student loan debt while also helping the community? So that was really how it came about from my perspective. But yeah, Daphne and I had met in school. That was actually how, like, go figure, right? Yeah. So she sat in my seat, but the story's a little different from her perspective, but we won't get into that.
Not true. There are no assignments in college, ladies and gentlemen. You can sit wherever you want. And it was the second day of class.
No, man, it gets shorter and shorter every time, Christine.
It was very few days had passed where somebody would say, this is my seat. If you can't tell, I'm a type A type student, so I graduated at the top of my class in high school. They call it high school in America. I graduated, top of most of my degrees. And so when I was in a class where the professor was not paying attention to my intellectual rigor, I noticed that it was because of where I was sitting. I was sitting at the top of the U on the right, instead of sitting at the bottom of the U, and he kept walking to the middle of the U, which is where perhaps Shamil may have been
sitting there. This guy right here.
So I arrived in class early, which is on time in college, and I sat in the middle so that the professor could pay attention to me, and it worked.
But all jokes aside, that's really how we met, and then after that, we just started working together on projects, and then we started dating and went from there.
Awesome. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit. So I love this whole notion. I mean, tell us a little bit about because I think some of the people tuning in are going to know about, kind of have a definition of what this financial aid crisis is. But can you guys boil it down and make it real for everybody who's listening? Because I don't have kids in college anymore, and only one of my kids graduated with a 4-year degree. One has a community college degree, and one went to a year of school and was like, it's not for me. So, which I applauded her for that. So it's like, thank you. I appreciate that. And so, but tell us a little bit more, put a box around what this financial aid crisis is in the United States.
Absolutely. So right now we're looking at over $1.7 trillion in student loan debt scattered across 45 million people. And so that's the amount of borrowers that are leveraging and shouldering this debt. And while not everybody has 6-figure student loan debt, it's an interesting percentage of people, because those make up the professionals that you go to for a lot of your key services, like legal services, medical services. A lot of those people are carrying 6-figure student loan debt. And even there was an interesting article about 2 years ago about a gentleman carrying over $1 million in student loan debt from dental school. So I'll share that link with you so that you can share with the audience. But it is a crisis in the sense that the cost of education has become so high. The percentage of growth has exceeded the percentage of how much people are getting paid in their entry-level jobs. So what does that mean? How can you afford to pay for school if the value of your time isn't worth what the cost of tuition is? And that keeps increasing. Right. And so what that means is that there's a lot of education inequity that can result from that if we don't take action ourselves. And also there's a lot of accountability with a lot of stakeholders. I don't want to say that this is only the part of borrowers, not at all. There's a lot of institutional accountability that needs to be discussed, both on the university side and on the government side. side. So this is a really complex problem. We've tried to unpack it by speaking to different people, right? On the policy side, on the university side, we're trying to find a consensus between these group of people to get everybody on the table agreeing. And in the meanwhile, we're helping the actual people with student loan debt bring it down, because it can be an impediment from you starting the rest of your life, right? High student loan debt. Are you going to be able to take out a mortgage to start a home and a family? Are you going to be able to take out that business loan to start the business of your dreams? So there are a lot of implications that come from that weight that student loan debt holds. And that's the crisis that we're talking about.
Well, and I'd actually offer that there's actually another constituent in this whole mix, and that's employers.
Oh, yeah.
Because, right, we've got entry level positions that now say that, if you're going to work at, as a cashier in the mall, you have to have a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
What the heck do you need a bachelor's degree for?
You do not need a bachelor's.
So I agree. It is an incredibly complex issue.
Yeah.
And so is the issue. So is the use of nonprofits as a way of doing that, because right now, and because I sit on a number of boards and I'm very involved in philanthropy, but the whole philanthropic structure in the United States is under fire because of how it is set up, that it's really out of whack too. So you've got the nonprofits involved, you've got the students, you've got parents, because not all student loan debt sits with the student. A lot of student loan debt sits with parents too. Then you have employers, and then you have policymakers. So I love complex negotiations. I love multivariable negotiations. It's one of my favorite things on the planet to do. And so let's talk a little bit about what's motivating each of those constituents and kind of what's driving them. So the students and parents is probably the easiest one to unpack, because it's more of that hardcore fiscal component, right? I can't afford to. I have X thousands of dollars in student loan debt. I've mortgaged my house to the hilt, and I can't, there's no more equity left in it. So I took what I could bled what I could out of my property to pay for education, but I still got debt. So I don't have anything left there. I can't go into that. Although maybe today, post-pandemic, with real estate prices so high, you could. But that bubble will burst too, and then we'll be in another situation, right? 'Cause that's the way the cycle works. But what do policy, in your experience talking to policymakers, what's driving their thinking around this? And when we met, we were at a National Publicity Summit and with Stephen Harrison, and I loved how you guys talked about it. Sometimes you'd introduce kind of your media pitch as, we don't believe that students should be overly burdened with financial debt, but we also don't believe taxpayers should be paying for it. So talk a little bit about the different constituencies at the policy level and how that comes into play.
Sure. So we've spoken to a lot of people in this space, but on the policy side, there are different constituencies. There are think tanks, right? There are organizations that are dedicated to proposing solutions, and people often aren't aware of how influential those groups are. They are really setting the intellectual framework, the thought leadership around the solutions that are eventually proposed to government officials. There are actual constituents themselves, and Shamil can talk all about this, but constituents drive, right? What your constituents want is what you are tasked with delivering to them. And so because elected officials want to be reelected, they are very interested in what their constituents have to say and how they vocalize it in an organized way. So Shamil, I would love to see if you could expound on that actually.
No, absolutely. So I think one of the, and Christine, let me know if I'm heading in the right direction here, but
trust me, I'll let you know.
No, so I think one of the major points is we've seen a lot of people on either side of the aisle, right, really try to think of what are the creative ways that can be done without necessarily making it all a student issue or making it all a government issue, right? And so I think the middle ground that we've seen so far has been the community college level, right? Or figuring out how to make that more affordable or free for a certain period of time so that students can leverage that opportunity to take the next step. One, either figure out what they want to do, right? Making sure that they're pursuing the degree that fits them. Right. Oftentimes you might say you want a degree, but then once you go see what it's like to actually work there, you might say, heck, that's not for me.
Never mind.
Right.
Right.
So that's one area where you can save a lot of money, because if you are going to community college and it's free, then all of a sudden now you didn't set yourself back financially just to explore that opportunity. But now you still have credits where you can transfer it and then pursue a degree that fits your passion or your field that you want to go into. So I want to say that that's something that I've seen that's been a really big shift, is that there has been a common ground where the first 2 years of school, or the idea of giving more financial aid, where there's like this combination of government plus the actual motivation of the student to pursue the degree as like a good happy ground. Right now, it's like where we are today.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a huge proponent of community college. So I was an unwed teen mom, homeless, on welfare for almost a decade. And I went to community college first, and then got into a 4-year school, and then ultimately earned my MBA from Harvard. And so the community college was the foundation. And, you know, when I live in California, where community college is state funded. So, you know, which is an amazing thing. And our community college program is incredible here. And I put some of our community colleges, Santa Monica Community College, Pasadena Community College, on par with some of the best 4-year schools.
Sure.
And they have really high successful transfer rates. Yeah. So people get great grades. You get those students, and you get a shocking number of students, right? Because who are late bloomers, right?
Yes.
Who you know, and this college access program that I volunteer for and I'm on the board of, you know, we work with a lot of first generation students. So students some of them are first generation in the US, but most of them are first generation to college, and they don't have anyone in their sphere of influence who has ever gone to college. Yep. And so community college can be a really great alternative for them and for their families, because their parents are very concerned about their daughters, you know, going out of state or moving far away, because there's a cultural difference. It's a cultural difference, right? And you know, you have to respect that cultural difference. And so the community college can be a really great alternative, and they just thrive there. And then it opens so many other doors for them. So and I know you sat on the board of community college, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah. When I was 23, so shortly after graduating from my undergrad, I got the opportunity, the blessing to serve on a community college board of trustees where I grew up, in the county of where I grew up. So I was actually able to, in summer graduations, see people that I knew and family members and go to their graduations and be a part of it. And I really got to see front and center the benefits of going to community college first. And that's why I speak about that subject so much. And I'm passionate about it, because I spent several years on that board, really understanding from the two perspectives, right? I grew up in an urban environment that was very traditional of what a lot of people try to say about having a difficult time to get to wherever you want to go. But what I learned from the board's perspective is that and something that we've always been told is that education really is a great pathway to set yourself up for success outside of whatever situation you were born into. And it was great to see, because we had a program while I was still there where we had students that were coming in from high school that were high achievers, and they were recruiting them to say, hey, look, we know you're a top performer. You can go to a 4-year school right now, and we understand that. But why don't you come to this community college? Because like yours in California, we believe is a top performing community college. We can get you a great base and foundation, save you and your family some money, and then you can kick off to all these lists of schools that we have partnerships with that know that you are here to basically step in that direction.
And that helps with the culture too, right? Of the community college for everybody else that's going there that may not have been a high achiever, but they get to community college and realize that, oh, this is serious. This is not a joke. I'm here to change my life. I'm here to make steps forward. And no matter how long it takes me, whether it takes me an actual 2 years or a little bit longer, it doesn't matter so long as I finish. And I think they really set a good example on the migration from the 2-year to the eventual degrees. And I think some of them got scholarships, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. No,
I was not on the board, but I went to all the events, guys. And I heard all the beautiful stories at these nice dinners.
Well, there are statistics out there, and I can't remember exactly, but I do know that there are statistics that show that people who go to community college have a higher rate of completion of their 4-year degree.
Yes.
They have higher GPAs than the people who start start at 4-year, and they come out of their bachelor experience with a higher paying job if they start at community college. And so there's all sorts of evidence that suggests that community college is a much more effective way to go. But it's a negotiation, right? Our culture tells us in many cases that you've got to go to a 4-year school. Not only that, you've got to go to the best 4-year schools, right? And so you've got parents who are going, real and house poor, buying property in communities for great education, and that's leading into a whole set that leads into a different debt structure, right? So they're overextended on their real estate, and so that they can try to set their kid up for getting into one of these great 4-year schools, when there are other alternatives. And in negotiation, one of the things we talk about is BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And so when you're thinking about where to go to college and where you're going to live, that's part of the conversation is what are all my alternatives? And so community college is a viable alternative for more people than those that realize it. And it gives people leverage, which then comes into what we're going to talk about next. And I just want to take a moment to, if you're just tuning in for some reason, if you walked in the door and somebody's listening to the show, welcome. We're glad to have you. Love that you guys are tuning in. We are sitting here today talking to Shamiel Rodriguez and Daphné Vanessa, who are the founders of StartNoo. And you are tuned in to In the Venn Zone. And I am Christine McKay, your host. And for those of you who would like to see the blog post and get kind of the transcription of this episode, you can go to venn.zone, venn.zone, and you can get the transcript there. And we got a gift waiting for you if you want to check that out. So now, Daphne, I have to ask you, so, people get their financial aid packages. So, right, they get them in, let's say, January, February, their senior years in high school, or, whatever it is, because you get a new financial aid package every year, and you negotiated your financial aid package. Tell us about that. So what I love stories when people negotiate things that people are like, what do you mean you can negotiate that? So tell us what possessed you to decide I'm going to go negotiate it. And then how did you go about doing that?
So probably my upbringing had a lot to do with that, where my parents never sort of accepted the status quo. So I was born into a family of negotiators, essentially. So not in their profession, but in life, my mom negotiates everything. Typical immigrant mom. If we walk into a store and she sees a piece of furniture that says managers, I think it's called manufacturer's suggested retail price, she really focuses on that suggested piece and tells the salesperson that there are other pricing options, and will explain that to them until she speaks to a manager. And she has walked out with, we could go on. You should probably interview my mom, because her stories of negotiation are cringe.
Sounds like a great haggler. So,
yes. So I grew up with that. I grew up with my father also not accepting sort of the status quo of life, where he lived and practiced, for example, in the United States for over 30 years. And people would assume as an immigrant, when you come to a country, that the number one goal is to become an American citizen, for example. And for my dad, he was like, nope, that's what you think, but that's not what I think. I'm here for a specific purpose. And he maintained his citizenship and never changed it, because that was important to him. And so he was still able to navigate and exist as a resident, and all of this was done legally, by the way. But he was still able to exist and operate without accepting what's told to you as an immigrant coming to the United States. So those two examples were really my foundation of, you don't have to accept what's given to you. Also, as a child, I read a lot of John Grisham, so that may have played a role. I've read all of his books. I'm a huge John Grisham fan. So if you're listening, I've read all of your books and hope to be a co-author with you one day. So that was
we'll make sure we tag him in this episode.
Yes, please do. Please do.
Yeah, we absolutely will.
Oh my gosh. I would pass out if John Grisham recruited me. But I'm a huge fan. Anyways, so reading John Grisham, having my parents as negotiators in their own ways in their professions, set me up for just looking at the world and not taking it as it's given to me, assessing sort of everything that's given. So I did get into my number one choice university, but the financial aid package was not my number one choice. They only funded me at 50%, I believe, of the total tuition costs. And so for me, because I graduated at the top of my class, I didn't think that was acceptable, even though this was one of, the top universities in the United States. I still felt like for my worth, know your worth is something that we talk about a lot with StartNoo. I thought that my worth was worth more than half of the tuition of this top school. And so I one day walked into another university, came in with my transcript, gave it to them and said, what do you got for me? And so they gave me something that I then went back to the other university and sort of haggled with both of them until I was able to come out with a package. That package was still not perfect on my end. And so I leveraged the donor relations office to complete what I thought was complete funding of my education. And the benefit of that was that every year it increased. So eventually I kind of got paid to go to school.
So tell us about this donor relations element, because that is something that almost nobody listening has ever even thought about, heard of, knows anything about. So tell us about that, because that's really a cornerstone of what StartNoo is all about, is how to leverage community service as a way of helping to pay for your student loans or fund your education.
Yes, certainly. So the donor relations office, which is named slightly differently at every school, is an arm usually of the endowment fund of the school or an alumni foundation of some sort. And so they are the people who are lobbying, or we could say raising money for different tuition opportunities, scholarship opportunities. And their job really is to manage relationships with donors, whether those donors are alumni or not. And so my second university, you could say, the one where we ended up meeting, had this office. And I walked in, introduced myself, and asked, what sort of scholarships do you have? Who do you have that's a donor? Who might be interested in my profile? Before going to them, I was very crystal clear on who I was, what my brand statement was, what I wanted to eventually contribute to the world, and why I was a good investment, you could say, for somebody to donate towards. And so they matched me up with specific donors. And all I had to do was do well in school, show up at the end of the year at a nice fancy dinner, write a thank you card, and speak to these really successful people. So it was a win-win on my part. It actually grew my network. I have I'm so blessed to have a strong network of very successful people. And a lot of that is due to the St. John's University, I have to be honest, and the donor relations office, and my eventual induction into the President's Society. So those opportunities that the university gave me, right, and I took advantage of, allowed me to create a network and also allowed for me to go to school.
So I love one of the things. So one of the things I talk about when I teach negotiations is that one of the most important things that anyone can do is be clear on what it is that they want. And have a clear understanding of what your worth and value are. And so because it's in that clarity that you get power in the negotiation. That's where leverage comes from. Leverage comes from that, your ability to say, I am so clear on what it is that I want, and you, counterpart A, you aren't able to give it to me. That's fine. Totally respect that. That it's just not a fit. Right. Then you can go to person B or counterpart B, and they can give you a little bit more. And then sometimes you can play them against each other and they can eke out some more to give you or whatever. But having that clarity gives you the ability and the power to say yes and no. Right. And when we don't have that clarity, then we kind of can get moved in any direction. Or if we are focused on just one thing and not clear about the whole picture. Like, am I just focused on the money, or or are there other factors that aren't monetary that are also important? And having that understanding is really critical, which it sounds like that was something that you did, because you actually used some of that language around being clear on what your worth and your value.
Absolutely.
So now you guys are you operate in New Jersey, you have some stuff in Florida. How are you finding the nonprofits? How are you discovering nonprofits to work with, and how are you bringing them into your network?
Yeah. So nonprofits that we've been involved in historically were actually recommendations a lot from some of our student users. So they had done community service somewhere and they said, oh, we would really like to onboard this nonprofit. And then we have a conversation with them. We're talking foundation because we've pivoted, but I'll get there in a little bit. So, and then the other source was really just pro bono. So perhaps I did pro bono for a nonprofit. I helped form them. And I was like, if you're interested, there's this opportunity where you could actually find help because you're struggling and you don't have skills. So that's another opportunity that we sort of, when we were smaller, we've since pivoted to focus on more of a university model, and Shamil can talk more about that, but that's really going to be the center of how nonprofits get engaged, is by connection to a specific university. That's where you're going to find the specific skill set for your nonprofit. But Shamil, go ahead.
Absolutely. So just like you had mentioned, Christine, we had some presence in South Florida, DC, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. So we were pretty scattered throughout the country. But what we have shifted to is a campus-based ecosystem. And so what we're doing now is we've shifted the model completely. So to participate in the program, you actually have to bring a university on board to StartNoo. Because like you said in the beginning of the pod, is that there are a lot of stakeholders here and they're all involved. And we need to make sure that they are all playing a part in this program to make it work. Because we see ourselves as a tool to have in your toolkit to help you finance your education. And then if you're an alumni, we also see ourselves as a reverse scholarship, like I mentioned before, to help you pay down those student loans. So we've shifted the focus to now be campus-based. So now if you go to StartNoo and you create your account, you can actually search for your university or college, and then you can sign a petition to bring them on to StartNoo's platform. And then that's how you'll get going.
And so for nonprofits get engaged by finding out, well, which universities are onboarded? Are they in my area? And if they're not in your area, then you can also petition for them to be involved.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's definitely different, because I was checking out the website. So, okay, that's really interesting. So if somebody's who's listening is running a nonprofit or is, director or on the board or something, then they just go to your website and look to see if what universities in their geography are part of the program, and then do it that way. So with the pandemic and so many people working virtually now, I know in all the nonprofits that I'm involved in, everyone's gone virtual. It's like you want to talk about not having to pay a population of an organizations who do not want to have to pay for rent. That is to be nonprofit. I'm like, I negotiated. I reduced our rent footprint by like 74% this last year.
Good for you.
So how does that come into play? Are you requiring people to be geographically located with the nonprofits
So service opportunities are actually virtual. All opportunities have the option of being virtual. So there is no geographic tie for the actual experience to happen, but the connection allows for you to have a better idea of what skill set you're going to be offered. So any nonprofit can sign up, but you're not sure if the skill set that you're looking for, you're going to find. And what tends to happen, we've noticed on the job market, is that universities tend to prepare students for the jobs in the area. And so as a nonprofit, if you're located somewhere, let's say you focus on farming, you're not going to find the student of your dreams to help you on irrigation in New York City, right? So it's going to be located at a university closer to you. And so that's why we're encouraging this model. It's not that nonprofits can't, open up an opportunity virtually and students can help from anywhere. That's still an option, but it's better suited for you to find, as a nonprofit, to find students in a university close to you. That skill set is most applicable to you.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I get it.
Yeah.
So how do people find you?
Yeah. So they can visit us at startnoo.com, STARTNOO, StartNoo. And we're happy to connect with you also on social media, where you can find us at StartNoo on Instagram, at StartNoo on Twitter, and on Facebook, it is at the StartNoo Project.
Awesome. Very good. So you guys are just about you're starting to launch this new program to increase the number of universities and colleges involved. Tell us a little bit about that and how our audience can help support you.
Absolutely. And so the best way to get involved with StartNoo is to find out if your university is onboarded. If they are, great. If they're not onboarded yet, you can actually petition your school to join. And so you just go to StartNoo, search for your university, and then find them on a listing. If they're not on board, there's an option for you to petition your school. When you finish doing that, if you're looking for some extra cash, becoming a campus ambassador or a campus manager might be a good opportunity for you. If you're a campus manager and you're accepted, there's actually an opportunity to get $1,000 if your university is onboarded. So that's what we're offering to the user base. If you guys are interested, visit us at startnoo.com.
And we will put that link into the show notes, which again, you can go check out the show notes at ven.zone. And there's a free gift waiting for you if you go do that. Shamiel and Daphne, it's been just an honor having you. I have really enjoyed this conversation. And I just want to thank you very much for taking time to be here. And to everyone who's listening, you know, I love you guys. You guys make this, I just love doing this podcast and sharing this information with you. And I really appreciate those of you who have clicked and subscribed and have rated and reviewed and all that good stuff and are sharing your time with us, because it is your most valuable resource. As you all know, my view on negotiation is a conversation about a relationship, and you cannot win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. So go get more value out of your negotiations, build those stronger relationships, and we will see you next time on our next episode of In the Ven Zone. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Shamil. Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you,
Christine.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay. We invite you to visit our website at www.ven.zone to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Empower the negotiator in you and successfully level the playing field. Join us again next time here on In the Ven Zone.